in seeing, sorry, I think all of us are here because we're interested in seeing students well placed in organizations that they are not only big contributors to, but also that nurture and feed them. You're interested in that as employers, and we're interested in that as educators and professionals in the art of higher ed. And so I think that to begin a discussion about how to show improve, we have to remember that our students, our potential employees are always looking in from the outside. So how do we demonstrate an actual commitment? So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I always think it's important to place us in context. As Kelsey mentioned, I teach here at Oklahoma State. I am working on 10 years now, and I've been teaching this topic for a good long time, and it's given me an opportunity to get a chance to talk to people at all different stripes about this work. And I always like to start with the context of who we are as a nation, right? And so we are a very, very diverse nation relative to so many of our peers. We are, in addition to the First Nations and peoples who were here before being settled as a larger country of immigrants, we are a country full of differences. And those differences have become one of our assets. We are still majority white, and we will be for many, many years to come. Our workplaces reflect the same diversity that we see in our current environment. I still have the 2010 census data here purposefully because the 2020 census data is a little wonky and they're still working it out, but we're going to see how that shapes up. But you can see some of the projections. We do expect to see some representation changes over the next 20 or so years. We're still going to be a majority white country, but we will see larger representational shares of the other groups, including a large percentage of Hispanic, Black, and Asian American minority groups. And beyond that, we've really used the diversity that we have to our advantage. It has become one of our critical, one of our defining features. And it's no accident that we actually lead the world in patents and innovation. We are one of the first to market in many industries because we rely on the insights that happen when we bring people with different backgrounds, interests, and concerns to the table. And so, of course, as a business professor, I can't help but think about the ways in which we think about this in terms of profitability, market share, and our overall sustainability. And so Monopoly Man sees diversity as like a huge opportunity. And we teach this exact perspective in business schools. We call it, in fact, the business case for diversity. And the idea is that diverse organizations are more successful. They generate more revenue, they create more market share, they are faster to market for a bunch of reasons, but a lot of it comes from making use of the diversity within their organizations. And so the argument and the evidence is like a three-legged stool. If you are a more diverse organization, you'll have better access to clients and talent in a global and very diverse marketplace. So to the extent that you're trying to sell widgets in, Southeast Asia, it might be a good idea for you to have some intelligence and some insight into the culture and needs, concerns of Southeast Asians, right? And that region of the world. And so having an understanding of your marketplaces means that you are automatically linking your internal capabilities, your human capital, to your external market, your customers and clients. And so companies that have managed to think about their diversity as a resource, as a tool, as an insight, as a valuable knowledge asset have been able to gain greater market share relative to their competitors. The other two legs kind of rely on what happens in the interpersonal space in diverse settings. We know that diversity, because it brings together people not who just look different, those apparent differences actually overlay a whole bunch of underlying psychological differences, right? So men and women don't just look different, there's also experiential differences that shape the way they see things. People from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, different parts of the state have different perspectives on how to get work done, right? On what the best answer to a problem is. And so as far as creativity and innovation is concerned, that's a really kind of direct link. We can understand that more diverse teams, people with different idea sets, are going to be able to come up with more creative solutions that eventually become the innovations that your company pushes forward, right? So we think a lot about, the Chrysler minivans, and they were the first company to introduce those drop-down televisions. And those are meaningful because, that came out of a parent group, right? A group brought together to be an employee resource group. And employee resource groups are important because they are a resource, not just to the employee, but to the organization. They become a source of knowledge, a source of insight about what this company can do for that particular client base, right? And so they innovated that drop-down TV because they said, hey, look, we love the design, but you know what? I have a 4-hour road trip with my toddlers. It'd be amazing, an in-house entertainment system, right? Hence the drop-down TV. Beautiful innovation made for and by a set of the employees that represent a set of the market. Now, the problem-solving advantage argument is a little bit more or less intuitive, less obvious. And I think this one comes out of a lot of research that claims ultimately diverse teams are smarter. And I'm really careful when I say that because frequently people insert the word, like psychologically insert the word minority or female-led when I say diverse. What I really mean is teams composed of difference, people who bring to the table different points of view, different idea sets, different thoughts, different approaches to doing things. When you bring together those differences, that team has to learn to work together. And then as a result of that learning, they actually can produce better solutions to problems. And it's kind of counterintuitive because you would think that they would just spend the whole time arguing about the best way around a square. And there is higher conflict in teams composed of people with differences. We think about cross-functional teams all the time. It requires a skill set to deal in a cross-functional team, a skill set of communication. You have to learn how to communicate very clearly if you're a research and development guy to the finance guy, why it's important for you to get the more expensive raw materials because your product will be better, even though the bottom line will be affected, right? And so you have to learn to communicate in a way that is clear to people who don't have the same assumptions, the same background knowledge as you. You also have to learn to become a better listener. You have to learn to become better at taking in the information being given to you and a better problem solver. You have to learn to negotiate with people who might have a different point of view than you. And so it's the act of working in diverse teams, of negotiating, of communicating effectively, of listening, of dropping our ego and looking for opportunities to sharpen our ideas. That's actually why diverse teams are smarter. They develop a skill set of living and managing in a diverse world. And so ultimately, this business case for diversity has made Monopoly Man very, very happy, right? And ultimately, we have written books and books and books, dozens, about the potential benefit of diversity. And I mean, it doesn't take, an expert to look around and see we have some big diversity goals, almost to the point where we're like, all right, if we just bring in a bunch of diversity, it'll work itself out. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. And I think the last 3 years have really put that in stark contrast and color for us. I think when we look around at some of the protests, some of the social unrest issues we're seeing around the country, when we look around at students being engaged in these protests, the number one protesters out there are young people. They are college students, recent college grads. They are people who are attentive to issues that our top students, not all of our students read the newspaper, but you know who does? Our top students. Not all of the students are engaged in what's happening in the world, but you know who does? The students you want to hire, right? And so they know what's going on. They're paying attention. They're asking about issues. They're watching what's happening, and their faculty members are talking about it in class. And so what we have seen over these last few years in really, really bold and bright colors is that, the business case for diversity makes all the great arguments for why we should diversify our organizations. But it does less in terms of producing an answer for us about how we make the diversity we bring in work for us. And that's really the job of inclusion. Inclusion is totally different in that respect, because what its purpose is to provide you with a real way to bring in and retain the people from various backgrounds all throughout your organization. And so I'm going to spend most of our time today talking about how we can get there. Let me teach you a little bit about For some of you, I recognize some names. I see some of y'all, I've met you in other presentations, or you've been a student of mine. So some of this will be, old hat to you. And for the newbies in the room, I'll try to bring you along quick. But here's what the students in my class. So I teach diversity management in the workplace. And we have offered this class here at Oklahoma State for more than 20 years in various versions. I think the very first iteration was taught by Janine Ray, and it was about women in administration. And it was so cool to watch it progress, because very few business schools have a cornerstone standalone diversity class, but Oklahoma State is pioneering that, along with several others increasingly. And we're seeing this happening across the country. The events of the summer of 2020 weren't just and it didn't just impact corporate, it impacted curricula all across the country. And so what are the kids learning, and what are they talking about today? Let's bring you up to speed on what they're and where they are. So they're learning about who they are as individuals. In my class, I teach them about, if we're going to talk about inclusion, we have to start at the beginning. Why don't we talk about ourselves first? And everybody loves talking about themselves. So this unit of my class is very popular. We talk a lot about who we are as individuals, our social identities. And we start off with this figure because what it does is it allows us to recognize that not only do we have a core self that's represented as sort of our personality, but we also have a social identity. And that social identity is really about membership in meaningful groups in society. So as an example of an unmeaningful group, eye color. We could make a group about that. There'd be brown-eyed people and black-eyed people and green-eyed people and blue-eyed people and maybe even a few purple-eyed people. But that designation doesn't really hold meaning for us at a societal level. Other things do, and those are represented in this figure. And there are a variety more that I couldn't fit into this, right? But this is a well-known, well-used figure to help us understand the ways in which our social identity becomes a part of our individual identities. And so we all, vary to the degree to which we identify with all of the different groups in which we belong. For example, I'm a mom, but before I was a mom, I guess I was a non-parent, but I don't think I identified as a non-parent. But now as a mom, I'm highly identified as a parent, and I highly identify with other parents. I feel that they get me and I get them. When they look tired in the morning, I'm like, I know what you've been through. It was a horror for me too this morning. Let's not think about it. Shh, let's get coffee and we won't even talk. We'll just sit in silence and drink our coffee, and we'll understand each other, right? That gives us a sense of we-ness, a shared identity. And that is what we call an in-group in the social psychological sciences. In-groups give us a sense of identity beyond our individual uniqueness. It gives us a sense of togetherness with somebody. I think about this a lot in sports, right? I'm not really a big sports person, but man, I love being at a sports school. Do you know why? Because our we-ness is at its strongest on game day. Man, you can't go anywhere without seeing orange, black, orange and black, orange and black and gray, orange and black and white, maybe just orange. It's wonderful. I see you, Tara. I mean, because this is about the day. It's about us together winning the game. And when we win the game, who won the game? We won the game with our blood, sweat, and tears all together. And we together get 40% off on the bookstore on Monday, right? Because we won together. And that's when our we-ness is so strong. And I love seeing it. It's a beautiful thing when people are joined together. And it also creates outgroups for us, right? So we are the in-group of cowboys. And, there's some outgroups, there's those other people up 35. We don't talk about them a lot, but, there's those people over there. We assume similarity with one another and also a degree of superiority over the others. We are kind of amazing and they're all right, they try hard and stuff, but we're kind of amazing, right? And so that sense of we-ness, that sense of positivity around your group is part of what gives us self-esteem. We call it collective esteem when we're talking about social identity. But the moral of the story here is that we prefer our own. There's an automatic bias, well noted in sociology, psychology, and a variety of behavioral sciences. We tend to have a similarity bias, an attraction towards others that are like us. There's a lot of reasons, which I won't belabor the points on here, but I know for sure it matters because when I tell my students, you know, we have a tendency to be biased in favor of our own group, we prefer our own, they laugh at me and they tell me, oh, Dr. Lex, you're being crazy. That's not what we do. We're all comfortable with diversity. It's wonderful now. Maybe that was y'all's generation's problem. And, you know, to a degree, they have a fair enough point. I'm like, okay, well, let's see. Let's go see what you and your peers do in the lunchroom in the student union. And I pick up all 50 students and we walk over, you know, across the way to the student union and we look. And we look around and sure enough, lo and behold, every table is segregated. The women sit together, the men sit together, the white men sit together, the Black guys sit together, the Black women sit together, the students from an international country in Asia sit together, the students from an international country in Southeast Asia sit together, the students from transfers, they sit together. You can see the similarity bias in action in places where we have the most discretion, where you don't have assigned seating, where you aren't able to pick your person of choice to hang out with. That is when you yourself are driven towards that which feels comfortable. And for most of us, that which feels comfortable is that which is very much like us. If you look around at your own friendship groups, I bet you'll see the same thing. I do, most of us do. Now, does that make us evil, bad people? No, it's one of the functions of group dynamics. Another thing that students are learning about, that people are talking about, and that we've recently at Spears written an employer guide about, which you can find at the Easton Center's website, as well as Career Services more broadly. We've written an intersectionality guide, and really it describes the idea that all of us belong to multiple groups at the same time. And not only that, but that some groups have advantages that other groups don't. Sometimes we call this the P word. So I know it's a highly contested word. I'm going to use it anyway. Privilege. The idea of having advantages just on the basis of belonging to the group that you are in. And I'll give you an example of how privilege has featured into my life. So I am, you can't tell because I'm sitting down in a chair right now, but I am an able-bodied person. I'm able to walk and run and jump and dance and do things with my full body. But there was a time that I wasn't. About 5 years ago, I got into a pretty major car wreck and sustained some big injuries, and I couldn't walk for like months and months and months. And I was like confined to my bed for like 3 months. And then, you know, your muscles atrophy after that point. So it was a long rebuilding till I could walk again, and then eventually do other things. But eventually, because I'm a highly fiercely independent person and I really don't like asking for help like many of us, I was so excited when I could finally like get myself into my car and get myself to the market, because I knew if I could just do that, there's a rascal, right? That little motorized scooter that I could drive around and get to where I need to go. And it was all fine and good. I mean, it was a little cumbersome, right? Because you got to get out of the car into the wheel, and then you got to somehow get your wheelchair back to the car, and then it's a whole thing. But then once I'm in there, I'm like, this is an accommodation. You know, Walmart, I shop locally, Walmart, Sprouts, all these things. I'm like, you know what? These are wonderful things they offer to people. This is a wonderful accommodation. I'm driving around slowly because, you know, they only go about 1 mile an hour. And by the way, they beep when you back up. So be warned. It's embarrassing. It's real embarrassing. I'm driving around in this little rascal, and everything's going along fine until I get to the cereal aisle. Let me tell you what I didn't realize until I didn't have the use of my legs. Everything can be accommodated except for that box of Raisin Bran, which is on the 7th shelf. And when you're confined to a wheelchair, you can only reach up so high. And so I had to wait until somebody passed that aisle for me to say, hey, can you just pass me a thing of Raisin Bran? Because I cannot get up out of this chair. And wait for somebody to do that. Now, that is a privilege of being able-bodied that I never thought of until I didn't have that, right? And that's the design of privilege. That's the way it works. You don't think about it until you don't have it, right? And because so many of us are in a group, and that group doesn't change for the majority of our life, race, you know, for most of us, our gender identity does not change, you know, and the way we present who we are, who we're the categories into which we are born, most of the time don't change. And so we aren't often made aware of the places in which we have some advantages because of just the way we are, right? So being able to walk to the back of the store, a whole football field from the front to grab the milk is a privilege of not having to worry about how long it's going to take me, about what time I'm going to get to the store. Will there be enough rascals? Will I have to, wait for one? What happens if the battery runs out? It's a mess, let me tell you. But it's not like I get free groceries because I'm able-bodied. It's not like the world is handing me things for free, but rather there are just many more steps to every process when I don't have that privilege. And so that's one thing that I think our students are thinking about in a very different way than we've traditionally thought about it. Now, another thing to note, there is a lot of conversation around equality and equity. And I think this has been floating around. Students have shared it with me, professionals in my practice have shared it with me, asking, really, what does this show us? Well, the E in DEI sometimes is about equality, sometimes is about equity. At OSU, the E is for equity. Equity means that we are paying special attention to the needs of those who have been traditionally excluded, while equality focuses on treating people equally, fairly, the same. As you can see in this image, there's a fence blocking the view. Some people are tall, some people are small, but everybody gets the same leg up. That's an equal situation. But as you can see, that guy doesn't need it. The tall guy doesn't need the leg up. The really small guy definitely needs a leg up, and maybe that guy in the middle probably also needs a leg up. The equity situation considers their individual characteristics, their individual needs, their individual circumstances, and doles out the opportunities accordingly. So in an equity situation, often what we're talking about is attending differently or especially to different people, right? So the treatment isn't equal, but the outcomes are the access to the rewards or access to outcomes is equal. So this figure can be confusing. And I often hear the issue of, well, aren't they all cheating by watching the game over the fence in the first place? Which was my thought when I saw this. I was like, wait a minute. I think a better set of figures is this one. A tree sometimes leans over. Structural problems, right? There are real problems, and that's an unequal situation. Inequality reigns in this scenario. In an equality situation, we'd be providing both people on either side of the leaning tree a leg up, a ladder of the same height. Now, the person who already had an easier time now has an easier time, and the person who had a hard time to begin with still has the same hard time, because equal treatment doesn't actually always lead to equal access. An equity situation would consider their different circumstances. The fact that the tree leans over in the direction of one person more than the other means that you should provide additional support for the person who is on the disadvantaged side of the tree. And then finally, my students are always eager to talk about, well, what's wrong with that blasted tree in the first place, right? Why don't we just fix the tree? It seems like we're doing too much. We could have got to get ladders. How many ladders are we going to get? How many different sizes? And then what's the other person going to think if that one gets a bigger ladder? Why don't we just fix the tree? Why don't we just fix the problem? Why don't we just talk about the structure? And so let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we know that we do in recruiting, and some of the things that work well and some of the things that don't. And so I'll share with you another slide that I share with my students about what goes into recruiting so that they know how to engage with you and so that they know what you're thinking about when they come to the table. I try to make sure that they come prepared. You'll have to let me know how we're doing. But ultimately, for everyone in the recruiting process, both the recruiter and the potential employees and the organization, all of these things have to be considered. And so from a recruiter point of view, the end game is job choice. We want to see the employees or the potential employees that we want choose our jobs, right? And so a lot goes into that job choice. And if we begin with the characteristics of the job, right? There has been some really, really amazing research lately about the impact of the Great Resignation on employees' willingness to work in certain jobs. We are at a stage now, and students have been there for a long time. You know, you ask a student now how much they want to make when they graduate, and they're all like, 6 figures right now, today. And, we have to do sometimes we have to do some, expectation level setting. But I think what it shows is that students for a long time, and especially now post Great Resignation, in the midst of Great Resignation, I guess, people are not willing to do the same things that they were willing to do before, especially after COVID. There are so many people who worked in grunt jobs, hot, sweaty, dangerous, volatile jobs, demanding jobs, physically or emotionally or mentally, who have just said, you know what, my life is not worth this, right? Maybe they weren't risking their life. Maybe they were spending less time with their families than they wanted. Maybe they were hurting their back doing the job they were doing. Maybe they didn't have enough time for their intellectual or spiritual pursuits. Whatever it is, they're all looking around at the vacancies and going, that looks terrible. I don't want to do that. Right? And so the characteristics of the vacancy, you really have to consider, are you making this a job that somebody would want? Are you making this the kind of job that has the benefits, the salary, the clarity of expectations in accountability and performance metrics? Are you being clear about expectations around leave time, reporting in time, expectations about how they're going to grow? All of those things need to be made very, very clear in the vacancy, because our students are very growth minded. They want careers when they are career oriented. Those who are looking to jump around jobs are typically not just interested in moving around a lot. They typically are interested in trying out different things until they find a real solid complementary fit, something that molds and gels with who they are as individuals. And so really think hard and long about not just your job descriptions, make sure those are up to date and accurate. Students love clear instruction, and they look at the job description, they take it seriously. Have job descriptions ready to provide to them. They want to know what they're responsible for and how they're going to be measured. I see this in my classes all the time, and I see this constantly in their discussions about how they evaluate their job opportunities. So consider your vacancy and how you're communicating about it. Consider also the structure of your organization, the personnel policies. What are your leave time rules? What are your flexibility policies? What are you doing to make the new employees feel not only welcome, but want to stay because they're becoming better people, right? Some of our top seniors who've moved on to amazing jobs, they don't just talk about, oh, I'm doing a great job, or I'm learning so much about marketing, or I'm learning so much about sales. They're like, hey, I met Oprah at the company retreat. Hey, they're sending me to a 6-week training program in, Vail, Colorado, and I'm super excited because I'm going to learn so much. What policies do you have in place to enrich the people that you bring in? It costs so much to bring in a person and lose them. What are you doing to keep your people? We talk a ton about recruiter traits and behaviors, and I don't want to talk a ton about that. I think everybody does the matching thing. You match your recruiter to the potential applicants that you want to attract, right? You send people from the same school to that, to that site to recruit. You send people perhaps of the same gender or race. All of those things do work. There's lots of evidence behind it. But I think we might also want to think a little bit more deeply about who recruiters are, right? Recruiters have special skills, and it's a really important job to have. But we also need to make sure that our recruiters are on the inside of the organization, understanding the business and understanding how that works. And we also need to make sure that our business partners, the people that are essential to the core of the organization, are firmly embedded in our recruiting process as well. Have they updated their job descriptions? Are they really clear about what skills and competences and certifications and degrees are really necessary for the work? Hey, sorry, Kim, I think you're unmuted. I'm going to try to mute you, okay? I can't mute you, but maybe someone else can. So ultimately, when we talk about these recruiter traits and behaviors, I think we should think more about who is really involved in the recruiting process and making sure there's a lot of communication, if not involvement, from the business as well as HR and our recruiters, our talent acquisition specialists. And then, of course, the sources of our recruitment. I know you know it, but we all rely far too heavily on internal recommendations. We do it to a dizzying extent if you really track that. It tends to be most companies' number one source of, of potential applicants, and it tends to be our preferred one because there's an intuitive quality to it, right? If we have an internal recommendation, then that applicant not only has an inside line on what the job is and what their expectations are, and they have some realistic job preview from their inside man or woman, but you also have a little bit more insight on that potential applicant because of their connection with your already existing employee. And so there's a lot of reasons why we rely on internal candidates. And I don't say we should stop doing that, but I do think we need to examine that and recognize that the people who have the ears of the tops of our companies, the people who have the ears of the head of HR, the head of recruiting, the head of whatever, are typically the people who are already deeply well embedded in the well-represented groups in your organization, be that white men, white women, Black women, whatever your organization is well represented in, that's who has the inside line. That's who's probably getting the ear of the decision makers. So when we go only with internal recommendations, we have to recognize that we're prioritizing sameness over variety in our recruiting sources. There isn't some untapped pool of diverse talent somewhere that nobody's reaching. The reason that you're not reaching them, if for any reason, is because your points of communication, like I said, are driven by similarity. All of ours are, right? Look at your LinkedIn, look at your connection, look at your friends. I promise you, for 75% of us, it will be very much like us, right? Exception being if you yourself are a racial minority or a woman, because we tend to have more diverse networks. Because again, our networks tend to be more similar to us, right? So when we talk about recruiting sources, I want us to be more intentional than thinking about, well, what's worked will continue to work. We need to think more broadly about how we make sure that the talent that is not in the center of the pack also has the ear of decision makers around recruiting and selection. So let's talk a bit about applicant characteristics. Let's talk about who these students are, who it is you're trying to recruit. So we all kind of know the generational group and groups, I should say. And, many of us live in this sort of space somewhere between boomers, Gen X, and millennials. I myself are on the very edge, the older edge of millennials. So I don't like to rag on them. And I think that we are a good bunch. We are a good set with good qualities, including really having a savvy and a comfort with tech, and having been brought together by a lot of, significant kind of structural and socio-political, geopolitical events, 9/11, Columbine. These are things that occurred in our lifetime, and also made easy to access and at our fingertips because of innovations like Google and social media. And the Zoomers, the Z generation, they have it even more accessible. They are even more tech savvy. They are even more attentive. And there is more going on in terms of social unrest in their own backyards. So our students are as diverse in viewpoints as the adults in the room are. And so we should recognize that Gen Z is coming up in an age of a lot of unrest, and they have a lot of different ideas and opinions. And like I said earlier, a lot of them are very cued into what's happening. This research is from Pew Research Foundation, and you can find a lot of Pew research just by doing Google searches, and you'll learn a lot about Gen Z. But I can share with you this, which came from People Guru, which based its research on Pew. And they are, like I said, social as well as digital natives. They're tech savvy. They're very interactive. Another thing to know about them, like I said earlier, they really like instruction. They want to know what specifically they have to do, because that lets them know what they have to really focus on. They like to be not told what to do, but they will ask you questions. They will want to know why this one way is better than that other way, which appears more efficient. And it's your job to answer those questions in a way that brings them along. They don't like, because that's the way we've always done it. They have a tendency to like to multitask and find other ways to the solution. And they like to know what your values are. They're, again, coming up in an age of, real clarity on ESGs, right? Sustainability goals that affect our climate, diversity, equity, education, and our society, our communities. They are very community oriented. They have been more attentive to ways to get involved in their communities. They volunteer at higher levels than generations previous to them. And they are very concerned about geopolitical and global events, including wars, global warming, climate change of all things, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So being aware is part of being able to have conversations that speak to their values. Other things that are trending now in DEI, some things to know. We've talked about identity, image, and intersectionality, so I won't really belabor those. Our students are very diverse in terms of generation. We have a ton of students who are going back to school. They're in their 30s, some of them are in their 40s. And also that they're very aware of neurodiversity, meaning learning differences, attention differences, anybody thinking about the spectrum and, social processing differences. They're very conscious of neurodiversity, and those who are neurodiverse themselves tend to be more attentive to your organization's rules around ADA, accommodations, very attentive to what kinds of communities you create for people with special needs. And so these are things that you're going to want to be attentive to because they are. They are very aware of microaggressions, systematic privileges and biases. And these are things that we're not only talking about at the college level in some degrees and things, but students are talking about it in their private groups, in their settings, in their private communities. And those are things that they come and talk to me about offline, right? Not even in class. Like I can't tell you the number of student meetings I've had with students who are just interested in learning more as a part of their varsity team or as a part of their fraternity or sorority. They are engaging in these conversations on their own, and they're enlisting us as guides. And so you too will be faced with some of those questions when they start getting onboarded in your organization. They are also really big on flexibility and agility. You have to be attentive to what their needs are, all of your employees at all levels. And I think that the COVID-19 has made it necessary for all of us to really question our practices, question what is needed in our organizations, and how agile we are at managing people's emergent needs, right? People's needs for flexibility change day to day to day in this pandemic. I'm still not ready to declare it over, but I'm still kind of holding my breath, and I think so many of us are, right? And so you need to build in the agility to pay attention to what people are telling you. So let me talk a little bit more about some of the specific practices that you can be doing to show your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So here are some of the award-winning practices that we've seen from organizations like Accenture, Eli Lilly, TIA, Marriott, AT&T, J&J. These are companies that have been known to be diversity leaders for at least a decade and have been winning awards routinely for the last, several years. So first thing, leadership commitment, vocal, visible, clear commitment to DEI has to come from the top. CEO or C-suite level need to champion this objective, right? Because it has to be a part of not only a top-down approach, but it needs to be tied and integrated into the company's strategy, what they do as a company, who they are, and why they continue to be profitable. And so your DEI goals and initiatives and attention need to be directly linked to your strategy, right? And so this is from Accenture, and their commitment is right up in front in their About Us page on their website. And you hear from their CEO and the chair of their DEI committee, right? So the CEO is on the committee for DEI. That's how you demonstrate your commitment, right? They help set the priorities and the goals and use their strategic function and their visionary roles to be able to decide how this is going to get integrated into the overall moving picture of the company. Ideally, they also attach accountability and rewards. Just like we reward people for meeting sustainability goals or for ethical business practices, we need to also be tying our metrics and our reward system to diversity metrics, right? And that drives people, right? People do what their pocketbooks drive them to do. So I always ask people, put your money where your mouth is. Be ready to pay to make changes in your strategy. Be ready to pay for experts to come and help you. Be ready to provide resources for your employees who are interested in learning more or participating. This has to be something that you create as a part of your bottom line. Also, you need to drive progress, right? From the top, you drive the progress, but you got to mind the middle. DEI initiatives usually are very driven by the top, and the people at the bottom are very interested. So they're driving, they're pulling for it too, but it's the middle, right? The middle where we've got kind of sticky practices. We've got sort of a frozen middle, right? We talk about melting down culture so we can rebuild it, but that middle, it's hard sometimes to really unfreeze that central core. Our middle managers, the people who are really doing the day-to-day of the work of your organization, if you don't connect DEI to the strategy, to the work of the organization, it now just becomes window dressing. And middle managers are doing the grunt work, the basic work of your organization. And if they can't see the connection, they're going to get in your way. So you need to make sure that you are bringing them along at the same time as you're bringing along the people at the bottom. Metrics matter. I will be teaching a master's seminar on using metrics for DEI goals in the spring next year. And, I can't tell you how much the conversation around DEI has changed in the last 5 years to be one that was really all around belonging and inclusiveness and culture, to one that's so much now more about how are you using your metrics to advance your goals, right? You can't have accountability if you're not counting. You can't think about how to reward that which you aren't measuring. So head counting isn't enough. You can't just tell me the number of minorities or women you have, because you could just have them all clustered at the very bottom. And that doesn't really actually move the needle. In fact, it just creates an organizational ghetto. Instead, you need to think about measuring your demographics at every level and doing intersectional analyses, right? Not just how many women do we have, how many women of color, how many women of different colors, how many people with disabilities, how many people with disabilities at different ages, right? Intersectional analyses allow you to do crosstabs and see how the mixes of groups are being represented at multiple levels. So your utilization reports need to occur at every level of your organization, as well as all of the horizontal units. So in addition, think about monitoring the representation in multiple ways. So not just the number of people you hire, but think about your yield ratios in the recruiting process. How many of your attempts to recruit are being successful? Measure those things. You should be measuring the rate of underrepresented minorities and women and other categories and your new hire level, among your promotion level, at your turnover level, the highest earning 10%, the lowest earning 10%. I'm going to say more about pay equity in a second. In addition, take that data and don't just count it, apply it, right? Show people that you are using that data to develop individualized succession plans and performance appraisals and development plans, right? Appraise people's behavior on that job description. Remember, I told you students like to know what they have to do. If you're appraising them on criteria different from that which they were hired for, they are going to be upset. Your middle managers and whoever is doing those performance appraisals is going to have a hard time. There will be a mismatch and you will have higher turnover. Be very attentive of your appraisal process and make sure that new hires know what they are being evaluated upon. More than that, use 360 feedback so that people are getting messages that got distracted. Be aware that you are getting messages from all levels. And so that 360 feedback allows individuals to know how they are appearing to peers, how they're appearing to higher ups, as well as people who work for them. And then take some of that data, develop your talent. Figure out what your top and bottom employees and need. Maybe your bottom performers need to be reassigned. Maybe their jobs need to be enriched or maybe diminished. These are things that you need to think through and work through using data. You should develop formal sponsorship programs. And I distinguish this from mentorship programs. Sponsorship is where you assign a person to be someone's advocate, right? To talk for them at tables that they don't have a seat yet, to push them in projects. And when they are given a reach assignment, to coach them in how to get it done to make sure they succeed, right? A sponsor is like that big brother, big sister looking out for you and talking and speaking up for you when you're not in the room. And there should be someone assigned to all those newbies, especially those who are more marginalized. And then work to keep your talent. Employee resource groups, you should have them. They should be popularized. They should be promoted. It should be clear from the outside that they exist, that they are active, and especially that they have a sponsor from a very high level of the organization, SVP level, C-suite level, whatever it takes. Informal mentoring is critical. Formal mentoring programs are a beginning, but the informal mentoring really matters. And you can't force that, but you can create the conditions for that, right? And that might mean having regular opportunities for socializing. People are desperate for social opportunities. Some people are not desperate to go back to the office. So you're going to have to recognize that. But some people are still desperate for social time. Maybe one of the things that you do as you are planning your return to work is thinking about how you can make the office days also social days, how you can build in time for intentional socializing, the kind where people would find a mentor, where you can give new employees ways to think about how to strike up conversations, where you train people on the fine art of small talk. It's through small talk that just yesterday I got access to an important person that's going to help me design a women's leadership development cohort program right here at Spears. It's through little tiny small talk, 5 minutes in a green room, important connection, right? Things like that, having the confidence come from having conversations in safe spaces like ERGs. And then of course, develop your high potential people, right? Create a pipeline for them, show them what your plan is. There is nothing like knowing you can do more and feeling like your company doesn't see it. So you need to make sure that you are not only measuring great, but that you are flagging, tagging, and pushing the greatness through your people, right? There's a lot more best practices in DEI. I recommend taking a look at Diversity Inc.'s top 50 best companies to work for. They have a huge list and a lot of explanation about what matters. I'll only call out a couple things here. Socialization and onboarding programs are so important for new employees, especially the young ones, because they come in, it's their first job. A lot of them don't know how to do anything. A lot of them don't know about personal financial literacy. A lot of them don't know about thinking about their retirement accounts. They should know when they take my classes, but you know what? When you're 21, you think you're going to live forever. Help them understand that they won't, and that a Roth IRA might be a good idea. You might also think about engagement metrics. Make sure you're measuring what people are feeling. Measure it, promise anonymity, and ensure that it is anonymous, that they aren't held to account for a report that somebody didn't want to see, right? Pay transparency. So many states have rules around pay transparency, and that is something that can prevent a lot of the pay gap that we see. The data shows that companies that don't hinge their pay offers on what that applicant's last pay was tend to have greater equality of pay across race and gender lines. That tends to be one of the leading predictors of when you have a smaller pay gap. Removing the question, so what'd you make at your last job? Just strike it from the record if you can. Honestly, you can. And it reduces the amount of that pay gap because it ends up being a trailing ghost of a gap. If every employer asks you from the first job, then that first maybe lowball offer will drag you for the rest of your career. Don't be a part of that process. just drop that question from the negotiation and give them the bands. Tell them what the bands are. Tell them what the high and low and what the, starting is. Tell them what they can negotiate on. Tell them we're not going to move on the salary, but here are some fringe benefits, or here are some other ways in which we can get where you might need to be. And here are the negotiable points, right? So those are things that you can think about. Supplier diversity programs are another huge indication to our students. Think about what they can see on a website. It's very clear, if you have these kinds of programs in place, that you can put up, that people can start talking about. Give them access to your ERGs. Let them see, let them talk to the people that are already in the company that are like them. Maybe consider involving your ERGs in recruiting. So I am going to stop here because I think we have 5 minutes for questions, and I could go on and on and on and on and on, but why don't I stop and ask if you all have questions?
Yes, feel free. I think that we have the capacity to drop it in the chat would be the best way, but also if you feel more comfortable unmuting, I can try to filter through those as well if you have any questions.
I'll go first.
Great question. Sorry, really 1 second, Bayfar. Lisa asked, what does ERG stand for? And ERG is Employee Resource Group. Some people refer to them as affinity groups. Some people refer to them as business resource groups. They all start with the same basic premise: providing a safe space for people who belong to marginalized or any community to gather, connect, and support one another. And that's the basic affinity group approach. An employee resource group is one where there's typically, and sometimes people call them business resource groups. I think I heard somebody call it member resource group yesterday. And these are again, same thing as affinity groups, but add to that, there's usually an executive sponsor who comes to the meetings, some of them or all of them, and participates in the meetings, learns about the needs of that community from those meetings, and probably also brings in, beta versions, draft plans, thoughts about where the next venture, the next product, the next move, and solicits feedback and insight from that community of special interests. Hope that answers, Lisa. Bayfar, what was your question? Sorry.
Well, this may be kind of an odd question, but I sometimes worry about, in an attempt to provide equity, it makes the feeling of inequality go up. If that makes sense. We're doing special things for certain people and maybe not others. So, I mean, can you comment on that?
Yeah, it is one of the fundamental tensions around the equity and equality issue. And the simplest way I've talked about it and that I understand it is that while equality is all about treating people the same, making sure that everybody gets the same treatment, the same, tools and resources and opportunities, all of these things are about equality. And so when you say something like about equity, and equity is about the outcomes, that sometimes means that you treat people differently. So we see this in the way that we provide resources for transfer students versus, students that come in through the traditional means. We provide additional resources for transfer students because they have additional challenges. They have a whole different set of experiences that they're bringing to OSU. And frequently they don't have all that freshman onboarding that occurs for traditional freshmen. And so we try to make very clear that when we are providing these additional resources, it's not just about filling a hole, but it's also because there are specialized resources and needs that we might have. So for me, it's about being transparent about what you're doing. And then for every equity decision you make that smacks of inequality, I would really look at that, Bayfar. I would do probably what you're doing all the time and really think, what is the justification for this treatment difference? And if we're providing all these additional resources for some groups and not others, how do I justify this? And does this sit right in my soul? I know you, Bayfar, you're one of our kind of lead alum. And, I feel like we all have to go back to that place of ethics and ask ourselves, does this sit right with my ethical proclivities, with our code of conduct, and certainly with the law, but with the direction we want to go. Sometimes we have to change what we used to do. So that can't be the metric. It has to be about where is it that we are trying to go. I hope the answers is probably not the easiest.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, we have another question. The other one is, where can I capture data on the success of ERGs versus using DEI steering committees to increase inclusivity of policies and practices?
Good question. So the effectiveness of ERGs, I think, depends on what you're looking to achieve, right? So if the purpose of the ERG is retention, then you would measure how much, whether or not you're able to retain people longer or advance them throughout the organization. So you'd use most of your utilization analyses, and you'd measure, continued progress, and you'd look at your turnover rates of different pockets of people who have ERGs to participate and are or are not participating. If you were interested in, whether or not ERGs help your recruiting efforts, I would measure the yields of the people who, make it through the various levels of your recruitment process, and collect information throughout the process. How'd you hear about us? How'd you learn more about the company? And let people, if as part of your interview question, ask them if they've seen your ERGs. Ask all of them, ask every single one of them. There are ERGs for all kinds of things. And just because ERGs exist, and we have to remember, it is illegal to exclude people from organizational groups on the basis of race, gender, and a variety of other characteristics. So ERGs are for the purpose of advancing the interests of particular groups, but they are not closed to members that don't belong to that group. So I can be a part of the LGBTQIA group here because it's also for allies, even though I don't belong to the LGBT group. And so you really kind of want to think about, what is the purpose of your ERG? If your aim is to provide greater relationships between your executives and members of those communities, measure that. So think about what your goal is and then measure that.
Fantastic. All right, well, we're at 11:01. I don't see any other questions. One last thing that I did want to share with you guys, and I will drop it in the chat as well, is we actually, well, it says click here, have our employer workshop coming up. And so this is something that has been virtual, much like our Employer Academy is today. However, we will be bringing back our employer workshop, which is not virtual, it is in person, and we'll be welcoming some of you guys back on campus. And I know that some of you are currently registered, but if you are not, I'm going to drop that registration link for you guys. We will have speakers such as Dr. Washington, but also others that will be sharing on this topic with best recruiting practices. And so excited to have you guys back on campus, excited to share that with you guys. As mentioned, as I dropped, is giving you guys an opportunity also to network with recruiting professionals across the board, discover best practices, network with OSU faculty, stakeholders, and career services staff. And so there will be keynote speaker breakout sessions, also roundtables, which are very popular. I think it's because we get to really talk about topics such as this one and others, and really get to share that and kind of hear what other people are experiencing. So if you have not, I dropped the registration link in there. Please join us. It's on May 12th. And we would love to have you. But that is going to conclude our webinar today. Thank you guys so much for presenting us. If you don't mind joining me in a reaction, applause maybe for Dr. Washington today. I even was like wowed many of times of things that are tangible. And I think that's what we're looking for in this, is what can I do now and take this. And so as we continue conversations and moving forward on this topic, I feel like we have some tools and resources, thankfully, to her today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, everyone. It's so great seeing you guys.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.